Welcome to the Investor Empowerment Series radio show, empowering your real estate investing with techniques, opportunities, and information, minus the BS and sales pitches. Now, please welcome the host of the Investor Empowerment Series, Joe Mueller, from the Tough as Nails Investment Syndicate. Joe Mueller.
All right, today we're actually at the IMN Conference Single Family Rental Forum in beautiful Phoenix, Arizona. I'm here with my good pal, Chris Davis, who is back on podcast number 3, I believe. Chris and I came out to the IMN Conference West, is what it's called, because they host 2 of these a year, one in Miami or the Florida area, and then another one typically in the Phoenix, Arizona area. We're out here mingling, meeting, and talking to some awesome investors that have built huge portfolios or have massive fix and flip businesses. This is a great opportunity for any investor that's interested in really expanding their business and seeing what it's like and how it is possible to turn your real estate investment business into a massive operation. Stay tuned. This is episode number 25 of the Investor Empowerment Series radio show. So getting things started today, anyone interested in finding out more information about the IMN conference, that is I as in Ingrid, M as in Mary, N as in Nancy. It's actually available online at imn.org. They hold a bunch of these conferences throughout the country every year, varying topics. This one is the SFR Forum West is what it's called, which is the Single Family Rental Forum West Coast. So that said, one of the things I want to talk about today is some of the stuff that was brought up in their opening session regarding the conference, which was about the state of the market. I took a bunch of notes, and I think this is some valuable information that any investor can benefit from. So, with the election, with our president-elect, Mr. Donald Trump, we're going to have some relaxation of regulatory compliance for freeing up more opportunity for more available credit as well as capital. Credit should be loosening. We're going to have an increase in better paying jobs based on Trump's plan to increase and improve infrastructure and increase the rebuilding and the increase of manufacturing in our country. So that said, Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae are potentially going to be unwinded from their conservatorship owned by the government right now, or ran by the government, I should say. What that means, I really don't know exactly on the back end. All I know is it's essentially a government entity being controlled. Even though they're separate corporations, they are essentially ran by the government to some capacity. And I apologize, I don't know that, or I don't know enough about it to explain it. We're going to be expecting to see some of the rates to increase and slightly tick back up. Now, the question is, are we going to see sustainable growth in our economic market year after year, like we have seen so far, 3 to 4% per year? I'm not sure that the answer to that question is available right now, but based on Trump's plan and what he wants to do, it sounds like it's a possibility, at least in the short term. Now, one of the things that was brought up during this opening session this morning, which I found pretty interesting, is that most people are working off of the real estate cycles that have been historically documented in the past, right? So typically real estate's in some type of a 7 to 10 year cycle. One of the panelists this morning noted that we're actually in year number 8 since the big collapse, which happened in August 2007. Actually, if I do my math, that would be year number 9. But anyway, my bad for writing down the wrong info, even though he said it wrong. That would implicate that we would already have officially recovered and all of our bad debt would be eliminated, which that's not necessarily the case. So we're actually in a slower recovery mode, which means a slower upswing into this next real estate market with increase in pricing. And please don't get me wrong. Obviously, we do see bigger increases in appreciation in the real estate market opportunity, and especially in the last 2 years. But it's been slower than typically the rate that it would increase based on previously historically recorded data of other real estate market swings. Wow, say that fast 10 times. So that said, the housing market in general, as of the second quarter of 2016, we're back to a pre-recession level, according to what we learned on this panel this morning. Foreclosure. Hey, you can just make noise now. I got like half your conversation on the podcast. That's Chris Davis, everybody. He's back in the room.
How are you?
Yeah, sorry. Chris was outside on the patio. We're staying at a great hotel called the Arizona Biltmore in Phoenix, just outside of Scottsdale. And we were upgraded into a bigger room, I think. That's what they told me when I checked in. I bet they tell it to everybody who's here. And we have this nice patio. He was outside on the phone and probably didn't know that I was starting the podcast that he's going to be a part of today. So, yeah, if anybody picked up on some of his conversation, maybe he dropped a few secret nuggets and tidbits for you to get your next property. So before I get to Chris, let me finish this state of the market introduction. So basically the experts on this panel, which maybe before I get any further, we're going to talk about who they were. We've got the vice president of Zome, which is formerly Home Search, was on the panel. Rick Sharga of 10X Homes, which is formerly Auction.com. We've also had a representative from Adam Data Solutions. His name was Darren Bloomquist. He is Adam Data is actually what Realty Track used to be. Apparently they just changed names. And one or two others that I might not have caught the name of. So that said, these are guys that are dealing with hundreds, if not thousands, of transactions per year and have their finger on the pulse of what's going on with the real estate market. So I think they're pretty viable sources. Wouldn't you say, Chris? You heard it.
Absolutely.
Okay. So interesting points that they brought up. Foreclosures are back to pre-recession levels. What they're saying is we're seeing what we saw back in like 2004 through 2006. So that means that the actual foreclosure rate has normalized to a level that is sustainable and not putting us in a type of recessive type economy. It's a sign that, so what that means for that decrease in that foreclosure rate also means that the speed and the efficiency of the actual foreclosure process has been reduced down, and it's not taking as long to foreclose on these properties than it did like 3 to 5 or even 7, 8 years ago. An interesting point that they brought up, which is probably not going to be consistent throughout the U.S., but probably in some different MSAs and markets, is that the banks are actually selling a large number of their properties at sheriff sales prior to even getting to REO. They're actually selling them, price to sell. And I find it interesting that I'm here with Chris Davis, who does some business in the sheriff sale world of real estate investing, and I kind of like to hear his opinion on that because he goes to the sheriff sales in the 6-county area surrounding Chicago and is actively buying properties. So, I mean, honestly, Chris, since you're here, what do you think about the price points that they mentioned during that opening session? Do you see that they seem to be pricing them lower than you would expect at this point?
Quite honestly, I have not, to be honest with you. So I would have to kind of disagree a little bit from what he said, just from my own experience. Over the last 4 months or so, the list has gotten quite small on the sheriff's side. And just recently, I would say in the past 2-3 weeks, I've noticed an incline of the list that's going to be coming up in 2017. I don't know if it has something to do with the election or not, but I have noticed in the last 2 weeks that the prices on some particular homes have been correctly priced to buy. So it's really hard to tell. It's kind of like any given Sunday as you go to these sheriff sales. So I guess the future is only going to tell over the next couple months of how that's going to go. In my eyes, I'd rather see them go to the sheriff sale than go to an REO company. Just gives us sheriff sale people just better opportunity to go ahead and keep doing what we're doing. I still buy, I would say 90% of my properties from a sheriff sale. So I'm hoping to continue to do that.
Awesome. No, thanks for adding that in. And what I'd like to add into that as well is, like I said earlier, I mean, each market's going to be a little bit different, right? So maybe where we're buying in Chicago, where you're actively seeking out these properties at sheriff sale, I mean, it doesn't necessarily apply to that big spectrum of data that they're compiling. Who really knows? And that, for them, a couple ticks of percentage points could be a bigger deal than what we're typically seeing as far as what they're calling a discount. So that said, I mean, another interesting piece of information, aside from the northeast coast of the U.S., they're saying that the bank shadow inventory is gone. Apparently there's some still lingering around in the New Jersey, New York area, and then further up that northeast coast just a bit, and I'm not quite sure why they didn't really allude to that, and I'm not of the previous educational background to tell you why exactly. But what they're saying is the rest of the U.S. has virtually zero shadow inventory, which also is what creates that situation where properties are going to be moving faster through the foreclosure process and getting to foreclosure significantly sooner than they have over the last few years. So for those investors who are buying as REO or who are interested in the sheriff sale or buying at sheriff sales, I mean, that could mean that you're going to start to see things turn a lot quicker, less continuances, less problems as far as getting that property to the point where it actually does get auctioned off. Because just as Chris knows, I mean, a lot of these properties, I mean, how many would you say actually make it to a sheriff sale that are on the original list?
Let's say there's 20 on the list to go for this week. I see maybe 15 of those actually go to sale, and I actually see out of those 15, there's maybe 4 to 5 properties that are actually bought by a third party, which would be an investor by me.
So 4 or 5 that actually get purchased by a real estate investor, what happens with the other 15?
The 5 that actually fall off from the 20 are usually canceled, and then the remaining 10 out of that 15 are purchased back by the bank, which then will also go to an REO company or to an online auction website.
Basically, those bids that the bank presents, the sheriff sale are too high for any investor to purchase at that time.
They are. I'm not sure really the reasoning behind that. I believe has something to do with insurance, and they have to get their payout somehow before they actually sell at a discount price.
Right, because my understanding is if it's like an FHA loan, FHA is insuring that loan on behalf of whoever that lender will be. So if we don't want to name names, but, you know, ABC Bank issues a loan to Joe Blow homeowner and it's an FHA loan, FHA actually recompensates that bank when that property gets foreclosed on. So they're going to try to meet some type of minimum requirement in order to recoup their original investment in that insurance policy, we'll call it. And that insurance policy is the sale at the sheriff's sale or the sale when it does go to REO. That makes sense?
Absolutely.
I think that's how it works.
No, I think you hit it on the head.
Okay, cool. So we're at a 6-year high in the number of homes flipped as of the second quarter of this year. So that's pretty interesting. The fix and flippers are exponentially buying and selling properties. And they also noted that the number of entities flipping is at a 9-year high, which means that there's a lot more small investors, guys like you and me, that are getting into the fix and flip business, which I think is awesome.
I also had another graph showing that I believe it was 68% of the properties that are being flipped are paid with cash.
Correct.
Let that be by hard money, soft money, private investors, or your personal money. I thought that was actually quite interesting because back in 2005, 2004, just trying to picture that graph in my head, but I think it was closer to 40%, 35%.
Yeah, it was about 35% during the last housing, transition, we'll call it, that were actually purchased with cash. And right now it is exactly what they said was 68% is all cash transactions. So a lot more capital flowing into the real estate investing market right now. So it's a great opportunity as an investor to obtain capital from various sources, whether it be private money or some type of a company. Like we work with Medford Capital as one of our sponsors for our networking group, and they are one of those types of lenders that offers private funding for real estate investment. But great point, Chris. So a little bit from what one of the guests on the panel was, which was the Rick Sharga of auction.com, mentioned that their data shows that 2/3 of the people bidding on their auction.com / what they call it now 10X platform are actually investors or fix and flippers. So only 1/3 of those bidders on those websites are actually going to be owner-occupied type buyers. I found that pretty interesting. I wasn't surprised, but it was nice to actually hear that the people you're bidding against are actually other investors, because I always wonder who's on the other side of that computer, bidding against you. And you never really know, but according to him, 66% of the bidders on auction.com, which I'm assuming the rest of those online platforms probably follow suit pretty closely, are investors. So it looks like right now some of the hot areas, obviously we already know about for flipping, are in the California region, that West Coast region, real hot flipping area right now, because they're seeing, massive gains in appreciation. And as far as the buy and hold market goes, it looks like the Southeast, which is going to be your lower Sun Belt down there, your Florida, Georgia, Alabama type areas, and the Carolinas are hot for buy and hold, as well as the Midwest is also one of the number one rated areas in the country for buy and hold investors. All right, so let's change gears a little bit and talk a little bit more about the acquisition and lending side that we heard today. As the yields continue to be healthy and as time goes by, new builds essentially are not keeping up with demand. It's going to increase the opportunity for investors to be in this market as well. Portfolio buyers nowadays, so the investors that maybe were buying a bunch of, we'll call it several hundred assets over a few years during the crash, we'll call them portfolio buyers based on what we learned today, they're actually starting to exit out of that distressed asset market. Number one, because the volume isn't there where they can't obtain the properties that they were used to getting. And they're now shifting a lot of that towards obtaining properties from other types of investors that have maybe aggregated, like one of these large hedge funds that has 4, 5, or 10,000 homes, and they're actually buying for quality and the opportunity for ease of management. Again, new information for what I understand about their business models, but it does actually make sense. I mean, if their opportunity to create a product is decreasing, but they can still obtain product and continue on with their business from another source, which would be, somebody like one of these, Blackstone type hedge funds, that's where a lot of these guys are shifting to keep their businesses operational. On the lending side, one of the interesting points they brought up was that actually today, which I believe is December 5th, Monday, December 5th, we're recording this podcast, like I said, at IMN in Phoenix, Arizona. And this morning, Ben Carson was announced as the new HUD secretary by our president-elect. One thing that I found interesting that they brought up was, based on his previous experience and what his plans are in this position, is that FHA lending will again become an opportunity for investors to utilize in the single-family and small multi-unit space, which quite some time ago, I'm saying plus 15 years, there was actually FHA lending out there for investors to utilize both through FHA and as well as the VA was able to supply investors with loans. And that all went away in the 2000s. Now there's a potential for that to come back, with our new president-elect being the first, number one, the first billionaire president to ever get to that position. And number two, being somebody that built it all off of real estate. I think the panelists and the people in the room definitely agreed that he's going to create that opportunity for a more productive real estate profitable environment. Some of the markets that we talked about this morning were the top 5 investor markets in the country right now, and I believe that also includes fix and flip and rentals. Is that right? Did you catch that part? Okay. So just to list those off for the listeners that are throughout the country or even the world. Number one right now is, and again, this is the top investor markets in the country, was the New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania areas. Number 2, which I think would be coming as no surprise, is the Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and West Palm Beach areas of Florida. Number 3 was actually Detroit, Warren, and Dearborn, Michigan. Number 4 was the Dallas, Fort Worth, and Arlington, Texas MSA. And number 5 on the list, Chicago, Naperville, and Elgin area, which is an MSA. When they say that as an MSA, that's basically encompassing that whole northeastern portion of Illinois. It's not specifically those cities or those communities per se, but it's that they count that all in as one, and those are kind of the boundaries of where their data comes from. So Chicago being a large city all the way heading up into the northern portion of Illinois, Elgin to the west, Naperville to the south. And that also covers that MSA based in that Illinois, Wisconsin, Indiana area. So as a whole, I'm naming cities, but think about the state itself and then the cities as more specific locations within that state. So, I think that's pretty interesting. We're in one of the top markets in the country right now doing investment business.
And what does it tell me? It tells me I'm not doing enough business.
That's exactly what we talked about, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was somewhere like around 22,000 for our Illinois section. That's a lot of homes. Think about 22,000.
22,000 what? What did they say? It
was 22,000 properties that were either flipped or that were purchased for a buy and hold. And you and I are just doing a small fraction of that. There's definitely a lot of opportunity out there, and there still is a lot of opportunity. So we just have to go out there and go hit the streets and see if we can get a bigger chunk of the pie.
One of the other interesting things that I found was what they stated was that the majority of the investment properties being purchased in those areas we just named were actually by out-of-state investors, minus that Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin market. So Florida, for example, or New Jersey, Detroit, Dallas, Fort Worth, and Arlington, Texas areas, they were actually they kind of put a graph up there, and toned it out by color based on the warmth of that market and the investor activity. And they they chose the color based on whether or not that investor was coming from the state itself or they were an out-of-state investor. And out of the top 4 markets in the country, minus the Chicago area, the majorities were all coming in from out-of-state. So they're basically absentee or out-of-state landlords or out-of-state fix and flippers, which, again, I find totally interesting how they compile that data. And it also tells me that as an investor and someone who's actively marketing for properties, that there might be a really good advantage to now marketing more on that absentee owner side to try to find more assets to acquire. Because if they're telling me that the large majority is from out of state anyway, there could be a bunch of tired landlords that are in those numbers. There could be a bunch of properties that are in distress or need help of a local guy to step in and take over, because some of these landlords just might not want to deal with it anymore, especially since the market's better. So maybe they're just willing to get rid of it.
I think that's what I'm going to be leaning toward in 2017 is, you get some of these mom and pop landlords that have been doing it for the last 40 years, and that the market is finally better. Well, unfortunately, I'm going to have to pay a little higher price to pick up a 4-unit. But if my numbers work, and I hold on to the property as long as they did. And hopefully I can sell them upswing also. Yeah,
and no, that's a great point. I think we're on the same page there. One of the things that, the last piece of information that I grabbed from this session we attended today about the state of the market this was very interesting to me, and I'd love to hear your opinion on this, Chris. The difference in profit when selling an occupied performing rental property versus a vacant retail type sale. So they ran some numbers, and this is based off of hundreds of thousands. Actually, I think they said on average 800,000 investor transactions annually, which is a very small, it's only 5% of all the transactions that occur in the U.S. on an annualized basis. When we ran the numbers on it as a group, if an investor is going to be selling a property at a slight discount because it's occupied, and they gave a number of approximately, or probably exactly based on the way they compile their data, it's probably computer perfect, 9% discount off of that price. So if we take a $100,000 property, we're now selling it for $91,000 as opposed to a retail sale where an investor maybe does a fix and flip on a vacant property or has a tenant in there. And that's typically what they were referring to is there's a tenant in place. They wait for that tenant to vacate, and then they try to sell it. They'll be selling it at $100,000. That even with that 9% discount, the occupied property rate actually still equals out within a less than 1% to the pricing of what a retail profit would bring in after all the costs are paid. So let me explain that, because that was a little confusing. You've got a rental property. It's performing. You've had a tenant in there for 6 months or 6 years. Let's call it 6 months for the sake of the conversation here. You sell it to another investor, maybe a guy you know, or an investor that's coming in from out of state that was looking for more of a turnkey situation. But moral of the story is you've got a commodity with a rental income coming in, instantly producing an income for an investor. So you have the ability to market that property independently to other investors, maybe by coming to a conference like this, or maybe by contacting a guy like myself, or
you can call me.
Or call Chris Davis.
I will buy them all day long.
Or Joe Mueller. So what that means is you've got a tenant in the property. They continue to pay rent. You're selling the property. You're still going to incur some closing costs. You can eliminate the cost of a brokerage fee, which typically is 5% on average. Could be a little bit higher, maybe a little bit lower, depending on who you're working with on the brokering side. Not a lot of cost involved, minus the actual transaction cost to sell that investment occupied rental property. Now let's look at that versus the retail side. When I say retail, I mean you had a tenant in there as an investor, and that tenant vacated. You've made the decision to sell. Now what do you have to do to sell that property on the open market for, we'll call it a retail buyer? You're going to have to clean it up. You're going to have to put some money into it, maybe paint it, have the maid service come through, maybe replace some fixtures, maybe put in some better appliances. You're going to spend a couple $1,000s there on that rehab. You're going to end up most likely to maximize your opportunity, and they use the actual numbers they actually use 6% brokering fee by hiring a broker to sell that retail property. And in addition to that, while you're selling that and spending those funds, so you're already at between 9 and 12% loss for the broker and the rehab you just put into it, you've lost your rent for 60 to 90 days while that property is closing, or while that property is on the market and while it's in the closing process with an end buyer. So the difference between selling as an occupied rental property versus a property that was previously occupied, which is what a lot of these hedge funds are debating right now and what they're going to do with their assets, is less than 1%. So moral of the story is you're actually going to be in just as good of a position and will sell faster if you sell to another investor with a performing tenant in that property, as opposed to just clearing that tenant out, cleaning up the property, and selling it on the open market. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. But that also opens my mind up to, investors that want to even do turnkey. I mean, if you want to hold on to the property for 6 months, either, you're making a little extra money on the rental side, and let's just say you got some sort of private lender, and you're paying interest only. And let's say you're making an extra $500 a month. Whatever. Hold on to it for 6 months. Put it on the market with the tenant in there, and turnkey, and you actually come out ahead. Depending on your financial situation or what your business model is. Maybe you're a newbie that's only doing 1 or 2 a year, and we're coming into December, right, and going into January. Well, it's a slower time maybe for on the sales side of it. Well, you just finished this beautiful property. Well, you want to maximize the amount. Well, instead of maybe taking that chance to let the property sit on the market for the next 2 months, or maybe your property is a little hotter than that, or the market is, but maybe for the next month, as the property sits there, and you're going to try to get close to asking price, well, maybe get a tenant in there, right? And obviously be very picky of who you put in there, because you don't want to get your property ruined, but maybe you can rent to them until March, right? And you have a year lease, and you can go ahead and turnkey that property to a new investor. I think it's an extra way to make money. It's definitely an out if you need an out for some odd reason. I just think it's a good idea all the way around.
And I think one of the points they were just trying to hit home, and is probably going to conclude our discussion on this topic of the podcast, is that essentially you're paying more money to sell that property as retail, where it's actually cheaper to sell it to an investor with a tenant in there. Even just take the rent you just brought up. I mean, if it takes you 3 months to sell a property and it's rented for $1,500 a month, we'll round up for this argument, but that's $5,000 right off the top that you would have lost if you just had it sitting vacant. And you might have just pumped another $5,000 into it to clean it up and make it ready for the retail market. So there's $10,000 right there, plus your broker fees. I mean, those numbers add up pretty quickly as opposed to just selling it with a tenant in it.
But just remember, though, if you're going to go that route, just make sure that in the end, that whatever the purchase price is, that the numbers do work for any new investor if you go that route. Because that could, I guess, get a little confusing. If your price point is $200,000 and you're only getting $1,600 in rent, well, a new investor is not really going to look. That's less than 1%.
Right.
So a new investor is not going to look at it that way. So I guess it all depends on the deal, right? Every single deal is different. So just make sure that you're doing your due diligence on that aspect.
So let's digress a little bit to a new topic, since we're both sitting here together at the IMN conference in Phoenix, which is awesome here. I already said that, but what do you think of Phoenix?
My kind of weather. Joe, we left yesterday. And,
got out just in time.
Yeah, it was snowing, and I think that was my first time I was ever on a plane where they actually used the de-icer before we took off. But
yeah, a little nerve-wracking.
We made it. Actually, Joe was on the phone with somebody, texting somebody last night that left. I can't remember what their flight was, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. We left at 11. We made it out, no problem. Flight was on time. Somebody was supposed to leave at 1 o'clock. I think last night at 8 p.m., they were still in Chicago at O'Hare with the delay. So we made it out here just in time. Today's sunny and 70 degrees.
It's beautiful here.
I love it. It's great.
Yeah, that guy I was talking to is actually from a title company in Chicago, and I actually had lunch with him today. He landed in Arizona at 2 a.m. this morning. He had a 1 o'clock p.m. flight from the day before. So they basically were on a 12-hour turnaround just to get out here. But they still came, which is awesome. What else do you think about the conference in general? I mean, this is my third conference for the IMN Single Family Rental Forum. This is Chris's first. I'd like to hear his opinion of it so far.
Joe, I enjoy meeting new people, making new relationships. On the other side, I come here and I had a good head on my shoulders. I got a good business back at home. Built a nice portfolio, doing 20-plus flips a year. I really thought I had it going on. And I talked to some of these guys down here, and they're doing There was a meeting this morning, and one of the guys on the panel, they are doing 50 flips a month.
Yep.
I thought that was quite impressive. I mean, it blows me way out of the water. It's just, our huge company, right? But they're doing multiple states. I believe the number was like 34 states that they're in. And that's the only way you're going to do those mass quantities. You're not going to be able to do that just in Illinois alone.
Sure.
But
or your home state, right?
Yeah. I mean, just remember that. I mean, just think of the team he has to have behind him. It's very, very interesting. And it's very interesting that the people, I mean, they're paying cash for all these properties. Even the rental portfolios. There's people that are walking around here that has 200 properties, 300 properties, and we're talking even single family. There was somebody, the last session that we're in, they made a very good point on investing, and it was about small apartments. I believe the number was that there is 80% of investment properties are 4 units and less. Mm-hmm. And the other 20% is made up of 5+ units. I thought that was very interesting because I really never knew the graphs on that. I love small apartment buildings. That's just me. Everybody else, I do have single family, but I believe that you can make more money with the smaller apartment buildings. And sure, you can make a lot more money with the bigger apartment buildings. But if you get into that aspect, I mean, there's a lot more to think about.
Sure.
You definitely are going to have to rework your managing plan if you're going to get into the bigger apartment buildings. There was a property management company on the board as they were talking about some of these bigger units. And I believe that he said anything over 20 units on a particular building, they have to change their whole strategy as far as managing. Mm-hmm. It was night and day. So as like myself and some of you guys are managing our own properties, mm-hmm. as soon as you hit that bigger scale, then you better have a plan involved. Like I said, I like the small apartment buildings, 4 units, 6 units. Those are small buildings, even 2s. We can manage those all day long. And I thought it was quite interesting too. And they made a good point. And I'm going to go ahead on the multifamily side. But let's just say you have 5 buildings, and let's just say they're all 4s, right? So you have 20 doors. Well, if you have 1 or 2 vacancies, that's not really going to hurt you. Sure, it hurt your bottom line just a touch, but I mean, it's nothing like if you had 20 single families and then you have 2 that are not occupied and you're renting those out for $1,500 a month. Well, now you're losing $3,000.
Sure.
On the other side, if you have 20 doors, let's say the rent is $800 a month, you're half that cost. It's not going to hurt you as bad. And the turnover, I believe, is a little faster on the multifamily side.
Sure. Well, we've seen it today because Chris has got a couple units for rent right now back home, and he's gotten about 10 phone calls in the last 6 hours from prospective tenants that are blowing up his phone all day on these units.
Yeah, I actually just took it down off of Zillow here just a little bit ago because, like I said, I was getting these phone calls in, and unfortunately, I can't get there until Thursday. I really don't want to let people know I'm not out of town. But no, it is very true. I mean, I put up last week. I put up 2 units. One was a 3-bedroom. One was a 2-bedroom up on Zillow. I put them up on a Sunday, and by Wednesday, I'm not even exaggerating. I had about 25 to 30 phone calls between both units, and multiple people signing applications to go ahead and move in. That just shows me how strong the rental market is. And I price these units a touch over what everybody else is getting. These units are renovated. But, I told myself, well, I'd throw another $25 on there or $50, and let's see how the market reacts to it. And you know what? The market, I mean, they're reacting just how I thought it would. So if I can get the extra money, I'm kind of ahead in the game, right? So if I can get a good tenant in there, they're going to pay me a good, fair rental. I mean, I can sit on that for the next 1 to 2 years without touching any of the rentals. As far as raising their rents, I'm in good shape. The other people need to follow me, and what that does is just pushes our market a little bit. I think so.
Now, do you think, and this is what my opinion has been in the past, and I think it is changing. Do you think that the fact you're getting, we'll call it 25 phone calls within a couple days of listing this property or these 2 units for rent, that's indicative of the fact that the smaller apartment building tenant is someone who gets up and moves more, doesn't stay for more than a year?
That's a great question. I mean, I had all kinds of different people come over to see the properties. I had Section 8 come visit me. I had people in the early 20s come visit me. I had people I had a couple that were actually in their 40s that were actually downsizing. So really the answer to that question is no. I think if you really, there are people out there that will rent a 2-bedroom apartment for the next 2-3 years. You know, it's just kind of odd. You know, yes, in single families, people tend to stay a little longer. But at the same time, single families are much more expensive. And that's why I like the market as, you know, if I can rent somebody a 3-bedroom unit that is roughly, you know, 1,000 square feet, 900 square feet for, you know, $1,150 a month, they're not really going to go out and try to go get a single family for, let's say, 900 square feet for 3 bedrooms, 1 bath, 900 square feet for $1,500 a month.
Right.
A couple miles on the road. So,
well, it's a lower cost of entry, so you've got a bigger tenant pool, right? I think that's what you hit on.
Sure, absolutely.
Because more people can afford, you know, a lower rental amount for a nice place that, from what you're saying, in this specific example, is offering the exact same, you know, square footage. So why wouldn't it be a great opportunity for any investor? And that's really what we're hitting on today, or this conference we've been hearing, is that these larger investors are starting to give stronger consideration into the smaller multi-unit environment. They haven't really started diving into it yet, so there's still opportunity for investors out there that want to jump on that ahead of them, because you know that could potentially start driving prices up as they, you know, dive into a market and start eating up all the 2 and 4 units around you. But right now, that still hasn't happened. They're giving it strong consideration. That's what we're hearing. That's what they're starting to preach at this conference, which was a great piece of information I grabbed from it. And I don't disagree with you, Chris. I know we've had many discussions on the the level of management intensity needed on a multi versus a single family. And for those who've heard me on the podcast before, you know, I've been through the ups and the downs of the downturn with apartment buildings, and it wasn't a good experience. But at this point, I feel like, you know, my toes kind of dipped in the water and I'm probably ankle deep. So I'm interested in looking at it more further. And you've already been doing that, which I think is, you know, a great point to bring up.
Well, just remember though, Joe, is one point I want to make out, and you know, you want to talk pros and cons.
Let's do it
about multifamily.
Yeah.
One of the cons is definitely if you go to sell that property. I mean, it doesn't matter on a down market or an up market or whatever market it is. You're going to be selling that property to, and so that takes a big chunk of your marketing out. I mean, the amount of people that are investing is a small amount. And I don't know the percentage of people that are out there are actually investors. They're actually looking for investment properties. It's very, very small. I think earlier you said something about 5% of the transactions.
Yes.
Are actually investor transactions throughout. I think it was 2015. Or was it 16?
Yeah, I'd have to go back in my notes, but we'll call it within the last year. Yeah.
So think how small that pool of people out there. So you know, you just really. If you're thinking about getting into the small apartment buildings, just keep that in mind. You know, I met an investor the other day. It was kind of neat. He called me off of Zillow. I advertised on Zillow for being a broker. And, you know, he calls me up, and I get to talk with him, and he tells me he's a newbie as far as investing. And I get to talk to him, and I love helping new buyers and new investor buyers. And he didn't know who I was. He just got me off of Zillow, and we started having a conversation. I told him what I do and what type of business I had. He just told me he bought his first property this year. It was a 4-unit. And he's actually house hacking a 4-unit.
Right.
I couldn't believe it. So he bought a 4-unit. There is 3 of the units are 2 ones, and then there is a 1-1 in the building. So he got in there. He's actually living in the 1-1. By renting out the other 3 units, and he's actually making $300 a month after all expenses are paid. He is living there for free.
He's getting paid to live there.
He's getting paid to live there,
That's
including
awesome.
all his utilities. I thought that was like the most perfect example. The kid is like 22 years old, just got out of college, and I mean, he is way farther than I was at that age. I didn't even start investing until I was in my 30s. But you look at somebody like that, and you're going to be very, very successful. And he'll keep moving. House hack the first one, he'll do it into the second one. So I hope to keep my eyes on this guy, and hopefully I can help him through some of the trials and tribulations of investing. And that's exciting to me.
Yeah, it's a great story, and I think that is a good. I mean, you brought up the point about how when you have a small multi, your customer when you go to sell that is going to be an investor, not a homeowner. But out of those investors, there are opportunities in finding ones that are looking to, we'll call it house hack it, right? Bigger pockets, which we got to get into that. We got to get into that bigger pockets thing right after we finish this topic. But, an investor looking to actually move into the property and live in one of the units and start their investment career that way. I mean, it's a great and very easy entry point to get started in real estate investing because you can still get an FHA loan at 3.5% down as long as you're going to own or occupy that property, and they'll loan up to a 4-unit building as an owner-occupied, investment or an owner-occupied property, but it is essentially an investment as well. So for those of you looking to start on investing, we've talked about the term house hacking before. We've talked about getting into that multi-unit, but this is a real-life example of an investor that Chris is recently associated with is actually out there doing it. And I think that's incredible.
Well, you just hit it right on the nose, too. FHA financing.
Right.
I mean, you guys, go for a 2-unit, a 3-unit, a 4-unit building. If you're going to house hack it, you're going to live there, you get FHA financing and 3.5% down.
Yep.
I mean, let's call it a $200,000 building. Mm-hmm. You're going to put $7,000 down, $7,000, and you're going to live there for free. And eventually down the road, when you're ready to do it again, you go ahead and rent out that unit and you go purchase another building. The coolest way to go ahead and start your investing career.
And the way FHA works is if you're going to own or occupy a property that you've utilized an FHA loan for with 3.5% down, from my understanding, and of course we can maybe confer with a mortgage guy when we get back just to double check, but my understanding is that you're required to live in the property for a year and that you cannot buy another property with an FHA loan for 2 years. So think about that for everyone who's really eager and wants to jump into investing and they think, oh man, I'm only going to get 4 units and it's going to take me 2 years to get to the next one. Trust me, by the time you're ready to, let's say you have to fix up those units, get them rented out, whatever you got to do, and stabilize that so you can actually move out. And then you were renting out that 4th unit that you were living in and now really making some decent money on that investment. That's going to easily take 2 years potentially as a new investor.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you. I had an example of, you just mentioned stabilizing your building. Purchased a building last December, and here we are in December of 2016, and I just now finally stabilized my building. It's only a 3-unit. I inherited tenants. Their lease wasn't up until, let's call it the summertime. I can't remember. It was July or something like that. And I was able to get 2 of the 3 tenants out of there, get the units renovated, and get the building back up and operating the way I want it to operate.
Sure.
The tenants, once again, we hear these stories all the time, is when you inherit tenants, the situation is not always great.
Sure. Right. If it was great, then the investor might not be selling it, right?
Very, very true. And these tenants in this particular story, they were there for 5 years. So I purchased this building, and, here Chris comes. I want to collect rent, But at the end of the day, they're basically running the building. I had no control over the building. And it took me a good 7 months to get back control of the building with a little money coming out of my pocket in the end because I had to renovate these units. They didn't pay the last month's rent when they left, so, I had to use a security deposit. They knew what they were doing. But, I got them out. The building is in much better shape now. Got it renovated. I put new windows in. And at the end of the day, I picked out the tenants. And I picked, hopefully, they're going to turn out great. So far they are, knock on wood. But, just remember that as you guys buy buildings, that you inherit these tenants.
Sure.
Buyer beware, because there will be a time and day where you're going to you're going to get a bad tenant. It's just inevitable.
Sure.
So just make sure that those are in your numbers. Vacancies also. Make sure your vacancy is in your numbers. You will have a vacancy. Mm-hmm. It's just a matter of time. I don't care if you have single families, multifamilies. There will be a time you're going to have vacancies. So just make sure you guys have reserves. We just talked about putting $7,000 down.
Right.
Building. Yeah, that's great. But make sure you have a little more money sitting in that bank just in case, guys.
Well, and I think that really hits the nail on the head, too, like you said, because you had to put $7,000 down, which is, the equivalent to a very small amount if you were to buy that investment property through conventional financing or a commercial loan, your minimum down payment is going to need to be 20%. And an ideal,
that would have been $40,000.
$40,000. So what we're trying to tell you is that as an FHA buyer who's going to occupy a multi-unit property, you've got the opportunity to move into it and put down a minimal down payment, but still keep money in reserve, still be prepared for, still have that rainy day fund available to you. So because you will, especially if you buy something where you're inheriting tenants that are already occupying the other units that you're not living in, they're probably going to need a little bit of work. So be prepared for that. So whether you set aside rent as they pay when you first take possession of the property and utilize that that net rent that you've collected towards future repairs, like put it in your little reserve bank account, or, you've brought more savings to the table and you need to be prepared for those renovations. There's one point, though, that I do want to bring up, which I don't think – we touched on it once on, I think, the Section 8 podcast back. Section 8 was, I think, episode number 18. To Section 8 or to not Section 8, the good, bad, and the ugly. We're going to do another one of those soon, by the way, because I got some updates on some information for you. But that said, if you're occupying the building yourself, you can discriminate against tenants. So as long as you're owner-occupying, you don't have to follow the fair housing laws that are out there. And I know that sounds strange to a lot of people, but because it's your property that you're actually occupying, there is a loophole essentially in the law that says you're allowed to discriminate against those tenants. Now, I wouldn't be discriminating in the term of what you think I'm saying in terms of like, hey, I don't like the color of your skin. I'm saying if you don't like who potentially is going to occupy that unit in the future when you're going to rent to them, you can reject their application for any reason whatsoever without cause. So keep that in mind as a potential investor who wants to buy into the multi-unit and actually occupy the property, that you can, I'm not advocating for discrimination again, but it may create an opportunity to, as you house hack a building or two, to create a better tenant base potentially, because you can just rent to whoever you feel more comfortable with for whatever that reason may be. I think that's the PC way of saying that, right?
Sure. No, absolutely. I think you made a very good point about discrimination, but and I know that Joe just mentioned, you can discriminate a little bit is when you do live in the building, but out of good practice, I highly advise not to discriminate whatsoever. It's just going to get yourself in trouble down the road because let's say you do end up moving out of that building yourself and you're renting it to tenants. I mean, you'll have that in the back of your mind. Oh, I still can do this. You can't. Just stay out of trouble. Follow the rules about discrimination, and just don't discriminate. Period. And you'll be safe.
Right.
That's just my perspective on it.
I think the advantage that the law gives you is because you're occupying that property, you can make the ultimate decision regardless of cause for whatever reason you want to not rent to or rent to whatever tenant you want. So that's probably the better way of saying it.
But the one thing he is right, you do not have to rent the Section 8. That is
that's always the case though.
Yeah.
Right. With any rental, you do not have to you have to accept Section 8.
So just keep that in mind. And because you did touch base on Section 8, and I'm not totally against Section 8. I'm not totally for it either. So I'm kind of in between. But
it still depends on the tenant, right? I mean, it's all about the tenant.
Yeah, absolutely. I would do. I do the same screening. If someone wants to come to me and has Section 8, I do the same screening, credit, background check. Same thing I do with any other tenant. So I treat them no different than I treat anybody else. But at the same time, if you have a 4-unit building, do you want 2 of your units to be Section 8 and 2 of them not to be? And here's the reason I say that is if 2 that is not, how are they going to feel? Because how are they going to feel when the other 2 units are occupied by Section 8? That could cause a problem.
Sure.
Where, they may want to break their lease and get out. Who knows what the situation is? All I'm saying is if you're going to do Section 8 for a building, I do all the units in Section 8. If you're not, don't do any of them in Section 8.
And I think what you're trying to say with having, let's say, having 2 out of 4 units Section 8 and the other 2 non is it's not necessarily a people problem, but it comes down to relationships with tenants. So they'll walk in the same front door and they see each other every day, every morning, every evening, and that could cause some personal strife between the tenants when they realize that perhaps there's someone collecting a benefit that maybe they feel they should be entitled to as well. And we're just being real here. I mean, that's a realistic concern in any situation. So I think it's great that Chris brought that up. That said, I don't know. Do you want to talk about anything else? Why don't we talk a little bit more about what you've been up to? I mean, maybe give us a quick Chris Davis recap since the last time I interviewed you, which was like 21 episodes ago or something. It was a long time ago.
I am up to, we're still flipping away. We're still picking properties up at the sheriff's auction, and I really turn a lot more toward rental properties.
Told you so.
Yeah, it's a great thing. I called Joel the other day, and I told him I have an addiction problem. My addiction problem is I want to keep every property now. As I see the market keep floating up, and I sold some of these properties really, really cheap. I should have kept them as rentals. But at the same time, my business model is to take, the flip money that I do make and purchase rental properties. So I still have to keep that going. And, I've noticed there's still a lot of opportunities. I mean, we're buying multifamilies from auctions. We're buying single families from auctions. So properties are still out there. So we're chugging away. I think going into 2017, we already got a jump start. I think we got the last 2 weeks, we picked up 4 new properties. So all those properties are going to go into 2017. So
awesome.
And we should close out, hopefully, I think December here, we got, 2 properties that are closing. So we're going to reach our goal of 20 this year, which is fantastic as far as flipping. I definitely hit my goal as far as purchasing rental properties this year. So 2017, I have a much bigger goal.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm hoping to flip at least 25 properties next year. And to add to my portfolio, I'd like to pick up 10 to 15 rentals.
What does that mean, units or properties, or what are you thinking?
I would say 10 properties.
Okay.
On the unit side, maybe close to 20.
Cool.
It's just a goal. I love hitting my goals. So I kind of set my standards high. We'll see what happens. It's exciting.
It is exciting.
Keep the money flowing, and we'll keep buying.
It's a good time to be an investor.
It is.
And I just want to close out this podcast as we're close to an hour in at this point with back to what we started with, which was the benefit of surrounding yourself with people that are either more successful than you are or putting you in a position to strive to want to be more like what they are to some degree. And I'm not saying envy. I'm saying surround yourself with people that are doing what you really want to do, whether it be in your business or your life, so you can eventually reach that level. I believe I heard a quote once, and I'm sure someone can tell me who quoted it or who originally said it, but was, you become the product of the 5 people you surround yourself the most with. And the reason why I brought Chris to this conference, number one, because he works for Tannis, and I have an opportunity to bring one Tannis-related contractor employee along with me at no cost, which is why, he decided he wanted to tag along.
Thank you, Joe.
You're welcome. That's I'm just saying it, that's how it all came about. But I really wanted to expose him to some of the experiences I've had at these types of meetings and open his eyes to the possibility to really create higher growth in the next year or 2 years or 5 years. Because that's really what happens when you go home from this type of an environment, is you sit down and think to yourself, wow, like that guy in the last panel, David Litchford, I think his name was, from some type of capital group, Intrepid Capital. He has 1,200 single-family properties. Yes, 1,200. That's what he said when he got up there. I checked his bio on the internet before we started recording. 1,200 single-family properties. That's just single-family. It doesn't include the fact that he also is syndicating in apartment buildings and has multis, has done strip malls and all types of deals. 1,200 single-family properties. So, for an example, what Chris and I are going to be doing tomorrow morning in Phoenix, Arizona at 8 a.m. is something they call the small group meeting. The long-term single-family investment plan on getting to 50 to 100 rentals in your portfolio.
It's amazing stuff.
It's incredible. This is an awesome conference.
So, and thank you again for taking me out here, Joe.
Sure.
I think this is one of the coolest things I've ever been to. But it has really opened my eyes a little bit. I started really truly investing a little over 3 years ago, and really building my rental portfolio 2 years. And I look at some of these guys, like just said, the 1,200 properties. I mean, that's crazy. But here's the end result of that is you take myself or you take a newbie, and if you can get 30 to 50 properties in the next 10 years, you guys, the sky is the limit.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's, who cares about the guy that has 1,200 properties? Congratulations. But you know what? Let's start off with one. Let's start off with one. Let's start off with one property, and let's get the 5, let's get the 10, let's get the 20, and we're on for success. That's for sure.
Oh, you know what? There is one more thing I want to mention. Last night, we were chilling like villains at the bar, and we happened to hear a familiar voice behind us, and it was none other than the Brandon Turner of Bigger Pockets. For those of you who listen to the Bigger Pockets podcast or on the Bigger Pockets website, Brandon Turner is currently here at the conference. We didn't have a chance to interrupt his meeting last night to take selfies with him or autographs, which is what I pretty much wanted to do. But he was in the middle of a meeting with 2 or 3 other investors, so I didn't want to be rude, especially on my first meeting with the guy. But Chris and I have a goal that before we leave this conference, we're going to make contact to some level with Brandon Turner of Bigger Pockets. And I don't know. I was pretty excited when I saw him. I don't know what you feel, but...
Oh, I was extremely pumped.
It's awesome.
So I do have a great goal, and actually it's same goal as Joe here. We will find him tonight.
We're going to hunt him down. So, Brandon, if you're listening, we're going to get you.
I will take a selfie with him. And if Joe wants to join, that's fantastic.
Great. Thank you.
And maybe we can do a Bigger Pockets podcast. I'd love that. But Bigger Pockets do they do a great job also, and especially for newbies here. And Joe's doing the same thing. Is really getting the information, the real information out there, instead of these gurus that want $1,500 for the first course and $20,000 for the next course. So this is great information, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I think he complimented me just then. I'm not sure. He doesn't really compliment me.
I did a little bit, sure.
Okay.
No, I did. Joe's doing a great job, guys. But yeah, so just keep tuning in, and he'll keep bringing you guys the information.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. With that, I think we got to meet somebody. That guy from Waukegan who has like 300 houses, he said he wanted to meet around 4:30. So we got to get the flock out of here, huh?
We sure do.
All right. Talk to you guys later.
Later.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Investor Empowerment Series radio show. Be sure to tune in next week for another empowering episode. We welcome your feedback, so please rate us on iTunes and Stitcher, and visit us at www.investorempowermentchicago.com or tennisgrouprealty.com.